Oh, there you go.
Here we go.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I wish you could be with us for the session in person, but I know that you have you're not able to do that. But we really wanted your opinion, your thoughts. I think you're one of the significant thought leaders in this area on democracy. So it was really important for us to have your voice here today. Given your incredible article that came out around July 4th in Just Security. So I encourage everyone, if they haven't read this article, to read it. I think it's very insightful. One of the things that you talk about in this article is that we are still under threat. Our democracy is still under threat. Can you talk a little bit about that and explain what you mean and why you think that?
Sure, and thanks so much, Liz, and I'm sorry that I can't join you all in person, but happy to be part of the conversation. Yeah, I was really inspired to write that article just based on, a number of different concerning trends that are playing out in the country right now. And actually just last night, I had a chance finally to watch the New York Times video investigation of the January 6th attack called Day of Rage. And it kind of chronicles, it's based on a 6-month investigation and piecing together of information and listening to police calls and conversations, and just a remarkable video footage of that event, and just the dramatic attempt to overturn the results of election, and an attack that was fueled by an incredibly effective disinformation campaign that has lingering effects. And I think, it's just particularly concerning when we see the level of violent rhetoric, kill the traitors for their involvement in stealing the election from Trump. We're seeing just, this escalation of violence and violent rhetoric taking place in the country at the same time, that democracy scholars and 100 democracy scholars recently issued a letter warning that our democracy is in grave danger. So they were citing the, hundreds of voter suppression laws that are taking place at the state level, citing attempts to politicize the administration of the election and the certification of the results. So this could have very real world consequences in 2022 and 2024. And, all of this playing out in the context of, continued protests and struggle around racial justice and police violence. And so there's, kind of this cauldron. And, it's noteworthy that even the Fund for Peace in their 2021 Fragile State Index noted that the country with the largest year-on-year worsening of its total scores was the United States. So there are a lot of really concerning trends that are playing out, and our democracy is under threat. But at the same time, of course, we can do something about it.
That's right. And I also, on the Fragile State Index, we were the most worsened in social cohesion. And the countries that did the best prior to the vaccine were countries that had the best scores on social cohesion. And it shows you how that not only impacts our democracy, but also our ability to address a common threat as well, and where we lost more than 500,000 Americans. And in some parts of our country, we're still losing Americans due to lack of vaccinations. So I just, want to repeat what you said. Our democracy is under threat. And I'm not sure how widely that is known outside of people who are thinking about this every day, and conflict experts. Do you have a sense of, do people understand how, you talk about in your article how close we were to the brink on January 6th? Do you think people understand that?
I mean, I think it's faded from view somewhat, and and this can be a challenge when, we don't have the figure of Donald Trump kind of in the media, present, ubiquitous everywhere. So you sometimes can lose focus. But in reality, we came incredibly close. And, what is amazing is that kind of in the midst of this attack on the Capitol on January 6th, even like as it was still ongoing, there was a vote in Congress to still attempt to overturn the results from Arizona and Pennsylvania. Like, this was still happening. And so, the mobilization that it took to ensure that all people's votes were counted and that the results reflected the will of the people was remarkable. And it really did take all of us. And, it took civic groups, it took business leaders who, called for election integrity, who called for the results to be respected, who called for a peaceful transfer of power. It took, Republican state election leaders to do the right thing and to defend democracy around the election. It took all sorts. It took, entertainers. It took sports teams. Like everyone was speaking out and organizing and mobilizing after they, amassed the largest participation in election in a very long time. So yeah, we were very close to the brink. And I think the January 6th attack, just seeing it play out, like this couldn't have happened in America, right? And it did. And those kind of the drivers are still present. And that's what's like so deeply concerning about this moment, especially as we think about the lead up to the 2022 and especially the 2024 election, where there are real concerns that, that states could overturn the will of voters. And so then you kind of lose your democracy. And this is what we see all around the world, right? I mean, this phenomenon of elected autocrats, like this is how democracies die kind of thing. This is what Levitsky and Ziblatt have written about, that, leaders are elected to office democratically, then they change the rules to ensure that their grip on power is maintained. And we're kind of seeing this playing out at the state level. And that's what concerned the democracy scholars and why they felt the need to like issue the urgent letter. And I think even though it's not always visible, like, peace building folks, we need to be paying attention to the signs and the violence and the rhetoric and, what's going on and could bode really badly for 2024.
Right. And I think people don't understand that. If you haven't read the book, How Democracies Die, democracies, it's not, they die slowly as well. It's the grievances grow, perceived or real, resiliencies break down. And you talk a lot about the resiliencies that we're able to push back. Can they do it the next time? And will they be there? And so I think that that's a really important point to make. So what do we do about it? What's the, what are your best recommendations of what we should be doing about it?
Right. Well, first, I think we need to find a way to talk about these threats and also about like the future of American democracy in a way that transcends the traditional Republican versus Democrat script. So we need to be able to talk about our democracy and what is happening in a way that goes beyond red versus blue, Republicans versus Democrats. So, over the course of our history as a country, there has been this anti-democratic, faction, call it Jim Crow faction, call it whatever, that has kind of had a vision of, American society, democracy, that it's kind of a society for white folks, where white folks should rule. And like that has been a really strong part of our history as a country. And that has over different periods been anchored in the Republican Party, been anchored in the Democratic Party. And so this is like, is a bigger trend, in our society. But we need to be able to talk about that. And we need to be able to talk about how, like, this is our shared struggle in a way that goes beyond the red versus blue. So I think the first part is developing new, different democracy narratives that really can bring people together, where we can create shared spaces to talk about like what democracy means for us in the 21st century and like how we can live it out. What does it mean to build a multi-ethnic, multiracial democracy where everybody is benefited? What does that look like? And we need to be able to talk about these threats in a way that just is beyond the red versus blue narrative that is like really dominating. And I mean, I think related to the narratives is just the dialogue. Like we need community and national level dialogues that can bring people together across divisions to talk about, again, like what democracy means to us. And there, as much as I believe in, debate and being able to present facts, all critically important, we need the spaces, the non-judgmental spaces where we can actually listen to each other with curiosity, with openness, try to understand where the others are coming from, in order to figure out like, what are our shared values? Like, can we identify them? Do we have shared goals that we can work towards? And I think like those spaces are really important. And there are groups that are focusing on bridge building. I think some are more effective than others, and like some really encourage people to think beyond their partisan hats that they're wearing. And I think that's really important right now. So we do need the dialogue. And then, third, we need direct action. This is, the history of change and the history of increased participation in American society is due to movements, is due to protests, sit-ins, boycotts. And especially in this moment where we're seeing these threats and these kind of urgent, attacks on voting and free and fair elections, we need to be able to engage the largest and most inclusive movement to be able to say no to these anti-democratic practices. And I noticed today, in fact, Toyota just came out and said they're not going to fund candidates who are going along with the notion that the 2020 election was stolen, and that, that it was stolen in favor of Biden and was taken away from Trump. So they're not going to support candidates who go along with the big lie.
But can I tell you something about Toyota? And I am on my third Toyota car right now. Toyota actually was leading in terms of supporting these candidates. They got called out on it. I mean, they were like, I saw I looked at the graph the other day. It's only because they got called out. So I mean, it was beyond disappointing to see that. But I'm glad
it was, except what brought about the change, Liz? And this is what's important, because like, but and of course, this is an example of a company that had to change their position because people organized and demanded it. But it's going to take these different pressure points. And that's the important thing. Like protests, street demonstrations are critically important, bringing people out, visible. But yes, and the vast majority of protests, Black Lives Matter and beyond, have been nonviolent and peaceful. Like we know that empirically. But we need other actors involved. Like we need religious leaders. And I would note, faith leaders for Black Lives, the Poor People's Campaign have all just come out and committed to a summer of direct action, to lift the filibuster, to demand voting rights, free and fair elections. So it's going to take, again, kind of the same broad-based coalition that is willing to walk the walk when it comes to like basic democratic values and norms in order to, protect and uphold democracy.
So thank you for that. I just want to touch on one other thing. You and I were on a call yesterday where we were talking about the need for intragroup. Because it's not red versus blue, within each of these own parties, there are issues, even in the Democrat liberals. What should we be doing from an intra-group perspective as well?
Right, that's really important. And I was, part of that conversation in another one recently where a very thoughtful, prominent conservative leader expressed her deep concern about the authoritarian trends in the Republican Party, and that she was deeply concerned as someone like me who believes we need two strong, healthy political parties, at least two, in this country. And so like that intra-group dialogue and conversations is so incredibly important, probably equally important to the kind of cross-group dialogues that are happening in the bridge building dialogues happening across the country, to get on the same page, to talk about issues like January 6th, to talk about what are the fundamentals of democracy that we can all agree to and that we can all agree to when they're violated. So the conversations taking place, within conservative groups, certainly within progressive groups as well, because yes, there are issues, and there are conflicts that need to be discussed, aired, resolved. But I think these conversations and dialogues within evangelical, conservative, different groups about the meaning of democracy and about kind of what's not okay about some of these actions taking place is really critically important.
So Maria, thank you so much. I encourage everybody, if Maria writes it, read it. You are, I think, one of our national treasures on these issues, on nonviolent action, on democracy, on this work. We are grateful for your work, and thank you so much for being part of our community. And thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate it. And thanks for all you do for the Alliance. Take care.